The rain hammered against the windows of the veteran's home as Harold Martinez sat alone in the common room, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he held a faded photograph. The sounds of celebration echoed from the main hall where families gathered for Veterans Day, but Harold remained isolated, forgotten, in his corner chair. "Nobody cares about us old-timers anymore," he whispered to the empty room, his voice barely audible above the storm outside. "Welcome to Grateful Stories, where we uncover the moments that restore our faith in humanity and remind us that honor never truly fades. Today's story will show you how one simple gesture can bridge generations and heal wounds that time alone cannot mend. Let's uncover what really happened on that Veterans Day, when an old soldier's sacrifice finally received the recognition it deserved." Harold Martinez had been a resident of Sunset Manor Veterans Home for 3 years, ever since his daughter moved to California and could no longer care for him. At 87, he carried the memories of Korea like stones in his chest. The Purple Heart tucked away in his dresser drawer had never brought him the peace he sought after losing his best friend Jimmy in the frozen hills of Heartbreak Ridge. While other veterans received regular visits from family members, Harold sat alone during holidays and special events. His daughter called occasionally, but work and distance made visits impossible. The staff at Sunset Manor was kind but overworked, and Harold had gradually become part of the furniture, present but overlooked. This particular Veterans Day started like any other. The home had organized a celebration in the main hall, complete with patriotic decorations and a small ceremony. Harold had attended reluctantly, more out of routine than enthusiasm. He watched from his wheelchair as younger veterans shared stories with their grandchildren, their medals gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The loneliness hit him harder than usual that day. Surrounded by celebration, he felt more invisible than ever. After an hour of watching others enjoy their families, Harold quietly rolled his wheelchair back to his room, where he sat, holding the photograph of his platoon from 1951. The knock on his door came unexpectedly. Harold looked up to see Maria Santos, the activities coordinator, standing in his doorway with a young man in military dress uniform. "Harold, I'd like you to meet Sergeant David Chen. He's stationed at Fort Braxton and asked specifically to meet you." David stepped forward, his uniform crisp and his bearing respectful. "Mr. Martinez, I've heard about your service in Korea. I wanted to thank you personally." Harold squinted at the young soldier, confused. "Thank me? For what?" "For your sacrifice, sir. For what you and your generation did for our country." The old veteran shifted uncomfortably in his wheelchair. "I didn't do anything special, just did my job." David knelt beside Harold's chair, his voice gentle but firm. "Sir, with respect, you did everything special. You served when your country needed you most, and you've never received the recognition you deserve." Harold looked away, his eyes focusing on the photograph in his lap. "Lost my best friend over there, Jimmy Reeves from Ohio. Kid was only 19. "Tell me about Jimmy," David said, settling into the chair beside Harold's bed. For the next hour, Harold shared stories he hadn't told anyone in years. He spoke about the bitter cold of Korean winters, about Jimmy's jokes that kept the platoon's spirits up, and about the morning when enemy fire took his friend's life. David listened intently, occasionally asking questions that showed he understood the weight of Harold's experiences. "You know what hurts the most?" Harold finally said. "Nobody remembers. The Korean War is called the Forgotten War for a reason. We came home to nothing, no parades, no recognition, just expected to get on with our lives like nothing happened." David nodded thoughtfully. "That's going to change, Mr. Martinez, at least for today." "What do you mean?" "I've been coordinating with the staff here. We're having a special ceremony this afternoon, and you're the guest of honor." Harold shook his head. "I don't need any fuss. I'm fine staying in my room." "Sir, this isn't about what you need. It's about what's right. You've waited 70 years for proper recognition. Today, that changes." Despite his protests, Harold found himself being wheeled into the main hall 2 hours later. The room had been transformed. American flags lined the walls, and a small podium had been set up at the front. Residents, staff members, and several other military personnel filled the chairs, all facing toward where Harold sat. David approached the podium, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today to honor a man who served his country with distinction during the Korean War. Harold Martinez, who many of you know as a quiet resident of Sunset Manor, is actually a Purple Heart recipient who served with the 2nd Infantry Division during some of the fiercest fighting of that conflict." A murmur went through the crowd. Many residents had known Harold for years, but had never heard about his military service. Mr. Martinez fought in the Battle of Heartbreak Ridge, where he was wounded while helping to evacuate casualties under enemy fire. He saved 3 lives that day, including his platoon sergeant. For his actions, he was awarded the Purple Heart and Bronze Star. Harold's eyes widened. He had never mentioned the Bronze Star to anyone at the home. "How did you know about that?" David smiled. "I did my research, sir. I contacted the National Archives and found your complete service record. Your medals are all documented." The young sergeant continued his presentation, detailing Harold's service with a respect and accuracy that brought tears to the old veteran's eyes. When he finished speaking, David approached Harold's wheelchair. "Mr. Martinez, would you please stand if you're able?" Harold struggled to his feet, his legs shaky but determined. David stepped back and, in a moment that seemed to freeze time itself, brought his hand to his forehead in a crisp military salute. "On behalf of a grateful nation and all who serve today, thank you for your service and sacrifice." The entire room erupted in applause. Other veterans in attendance stood and saluted. Staff members wiped away tears. Harold stood trembling, overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment. But David wasn't finished. "Sir, I have something that belongs to you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, nestled in blue velvet, was Harold's Bronze Star medal. "I contacted your daughter in California. She had this in storage and asked me to present it to you. She also wanted me to tell you that she's proud of you and wishes she could be here today." Harold's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down his weathered cheeks as he held the medal he hadn't seen in decades. The room remained silent, except for the sound of his quiet sobbing. "I thought everyone had forgotten," he whispered. David placed a gentle hand on Harold's shoulder. "We never forget, sir. Sometimes it just takes us too long to say thank you." The ceremony continued with other veterans sharing their own stories, but the focus remained on Harold. For the first time in years, he felt valued, remembered, and honored. The loneliness that had consumed him began to lift. As the event concluded, Harold found himself surrounded by fellow residents who had never known about his military service. They asked questions, shared their own stories, and welcomed him into a community he had been part of all along, but had never truly joined. David approached him one final time before leaving. "Mr. Martinez, I have one more thing to tell you. I've been in touch with the local American Legion post. They want to make you an honorary member and have invited you to their monthly meetings. They're sending a van to pick you up next week." Harold looked up at the young soldier who had changed his life in a single afternoon. "Why did you do all this for me?" "Because you did it for me first, sir. Every time you put on that uniform, every time you faced danger, every time you chose service over safety, you were doing it for me and every American who came after you. This was just my way of paying you back." As David prepared to leave, Harold called out to him, "Sergeant Chen, wait." The young man turned back. "Jimmy would have liked you. He always said the best thing about America was that good people would always step up when needed. You proved him right today." Harold returned to his room that evening, but everything had changed. The photograph of his platoon no longer represented just loss and forgotten sacrifice. It now symbolized honor, remembrance, and the continuity of service that connected him to soldiers like David Chen. Over the following weeks, Harold's life transformed completely. He began attending the American Legion meetings, where he found a new community of veterans who understood his experiences. He started participating in the Veterans' Home activities, sharing his stories with younger residents and visitors. Most importantly, he began corresponding regularly with his daughter, who had been moved to tears by David's phone call describing the ceremony. She started planning a visit for Christmas, their first reunion in 2 years. The Bronze Star Medal found its place on Harold's dresser, where it caught the morning light each day. But more than the medal, it was the memory of that salute, the recognition of his service, and the reminder that his sacrifice had not been forgotten that gave Harold the strength to embrace his remaining years with dignity and purpose. David Chen returned to visit Harold several times over the following months. Their friendship, built on mutual respect and shared understanding of military service, became a bridge between generations. Harold often told other residents about the young sergeant who had given him back his sense of worth. "He didn't just salute me that day," Harold would say. "He saluted every veteran who ever felt forgotten. He reminded us all that honor never dies. It just sometimes needs someone to help it shine again." The story of Harold Martinez and David Chen spread throughout the veterans community. Other young service members began visiting elderly veterans in their area, creating connections that honored the past while building hope for the future. Harold Martinez passed away peacefully 2 years later, surrounded by friends from the American Legion and staff from Sunset Manor who had come to know and respect the quiet hero among them. David Chen delivered the eulogy at his funeral, where he spoke about the lesson Harold had taught him about the true meaning of service. "Harold Martinez served his country with distinction in Korea," David said to the assembled mourners, "but his greatest service was teaching us that recognition and gratitude are not one-time events. They are ongoing responsibilities we owe to those who sacrificed for our freedom." Today, the Bronze Star Medal was buried with Harold, but the impact of that Veterans Day ceremony continued to ripple through the community. Sunset Manor established an annual recognition event for veteran residents, ensuring that no one would ever again sit alone and forgotten on the day meant to honor their service. Today, Harold Martinez's story serves as a reminder that heroism exists in many forms. Sometimes it's the courage to charge up a hill under enemy fire. Sometimes it's the wisdom to recognize when someone needs to be seen and valued. And sometimes it's simply the willingness to stand up and salute when respect is long overdue. The old veteran who once sat alone in the corner of a common room, feeling forgotten and invisible, became a symbol of the recognition that every service member deserves. His story reminds us that it's never too late to say thank you, never too late to acknowledge sacrifice, and never too late to ensure that those who served are remembered with the honor they earned. In a world that often moves too fast to notice the quiet heroes among us, Harold Martinez and David Chen showed us the power of taking time to recognize service, bridge generations, and transform loneliness into belonging. Their story proves that sometimes the most powerful gesture is also the simplest. A young soldier's salute to an old veteran, acknowledging that the debt of gratitude never expires and that honor once earned is never truly forgotten.